Cam Newton put his foot in his mouth earlier this week when he came out and said when he came to Carolina, he went into a locker room of losers. And this isn't the first time recently Cam Newton has been critical of the Carolina Panthers, which has people asking me, what's going on with Cam? I'll answer that question among other listener questions in this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, because on Fridays like today, throughout the entirety of the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are here on Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to all the Locked On Panther listeners and viewers out there. I do love you, and love is in the air, but not so much as far as it pertains to the Carolina Panthers and one Cam Newton, as earlier this week, he had some critical comments about the locker room he walked into back in the fall of 2011. And that is something that has upset some players who were in that locker room, one being Steve Smith Sr., Agent 89. And it's also upset some fans wondering, why is Cam acting like this? Why is he bashing the Panthers recently? And bashing, not my word, the word put out there by someone asking question on this week's mailbag. Let me just go ahead and preface this conversation that we're going to have about Cam Newton by saying, I love Cam Newton. Born and raised here in Charlotte, love what he did for my hometown, my city, and how the Panthers pre-Cam Newton, certainly if you lived here in Charlotte in the Carolinas, you had love for the team, but nationally, we had our moment there in 2003. We had another moment a couple years after that, but it wasn't like this big brand that people looked at. And even today, Carolina, when you go 2-15, you have the season they had last year until Bryce Young turned things around. It's not like the Panthers are in the spotlight, but when we had Cam, finally there were eyeballs on Charlotte, on this team, and they go 15-1. They had the 12-4 season. They go 7-9-1, win in the wild card, get to the divisional round, and lose to Seattle. They get back to the playoffs after that against New Orleans in 2017. Like, the Cam Newton era will always be near and dear to my heart as someone who, of course, is from this city, loves this city, and is a fan and loves this organization as well. So prefacing all this by saying, have love and respect for Cam. Never was a Cam hater at all. And you can say, well, weren't you the guy who said that the Panthers shouldn't want to bring back Cam a couple years ago? Yeah, I was. And he came back, and it was awesome. The I'm back in Arizona. After that, okay, the atmosphere against Washington was cool. They lost that game. The lost game against Miami. Like, it was a fun 10 days. Totally understand that. It did nothing but just tear on the heartstrings of a lot of Carolina Panther fans throughout his time back. And then you had to watch Sam freaking Darnold start over him to close out the season, and Cam reduced to a red zone threat when he could be that and everything when he was starting quarterback between 2011 and 2019 during Cam 1.0. We never needed to see it again. So I'm going to say all that, and I'll get into the question. First asked by Stone, another one asked by Will. Stone saying, why has Cam been bashing the Panthers kind of lately? Like, locker room full of losers and rather have the MVP than the Super Bowl. He says national media is making me just shake my head at him. Will saying, I'd love to get your thoughts on Cam's recent comments that have polarized former teammates. Certainly, I will do this. This is from an overtime video where he's talking to Travis Hunter, who could be the number 1 overall pick, the Heisman Trophy winner out of Colorado, who played on both sides of the ball at wide receiver and at corner, won the Blitnikoff, which goes to the top wide receiver in college football, did not win the Thorpe Award, which goes to the top corner in college, which I thought Jahdae Barron out of Texas was outstanding, but come on, what are we doing here? Either way, he was talking to Cam, and Cam, who won the Heisman at Auburn, won a national championship, and of course was a number 1 overall pick back in 2011, was just giving Travis Hunter some advice and saying, you're the top pick because, and Travis says to Cam, the way you play, he's like, no. You're looking at that from a personal standpoint. Looking at it business-wise, you're the number 1 pick because you're going to the worst team in the NFL from the prior year. And what Cam then said, quote, my issue is when I was the first pick, I went into a locker room of losers. Guys didn't know how to win. Guys didn't know how to prepare. It was a culture shock for me. The games don't mean a lot to a lot of people in the league like you expect. It's just money. Not everybody has capabilities to be impact players. They're just players. And certainly the last part of that is true, that not everybody is in the league because they love football. They're there because there's a lot of money in it. And also not everybody has capabilities to be impact players. They're just players. Because yes, only so many guys are going to be the all pros, the Pro Bowlers, the MVPs, the offensive player of the years, those kind of players. Like that's not a league full of them. That's like the top 5%, 10% of the league. Obviously, like that's true. But the whole locker room full of losers, locker room of losers, not full of, locker room of losers. But you could argue if you say of losers that you're walking in, so everybody's a loser except for you. That is the sticking point that had people upset. And I didn't quote tweet this. I just tweeted it out or reposted whatever Elon Musk earlier this week. Steve Smith Sr. saying to the video that he saw, 53-man locker room -1 equals 52 losers. Wow. Breaking news to 89. Obviously, Steve was not going to take well to that. And if you remember back then, Cam Newton, Steve Smith, those guys butted heads a lot in that locker room as Steve had been the alpha. He had been the face of the franchise throughout the majority of his time in Carolina. And here's coming this new rookie who has this oversized personality. He's coming in to save the franchise after a terrible season back in 2010. And that Steve's going to have to kind of let him come in. But Steve's not the kind of person who's just going to let this guy come in and be the leader. He's going to be the leader of the locker room. And that led to issues where Steve's yelling at Cam in the huddle, and Cam said, don't yell at me in the huddle. And that also, in the end, led to Steve Smith not being here in Carolina and him going to Baltimore in blood and guts because the Panthers at that point in time felt like they needed to have Cam be their leader and that it'd be difficult for Cam and Steve to coexist moving forward. So that led to them moving on. Now, I think for the most part, up until this point, they had kind of come to terms and been cool. Now I don't really know where things stand as far as that goes. Jeff Schwartz, who was also on that team as an offensive lineman, you would probably know him because he's pretty active on Twitter. His brother Mitchell Schwartz played on a couple, maybe just one of the Chiefs Super Bowl teams, but he's in the media. He came out, he talked about it earlier this week, but he did a couple of tweets when seeing that, saying a locker room full of losers. Now it was a locker room of losers, but whatever. A locker room full of losers who didn't know how to win and who didn't know how to prepare. Oh boy. Sure, we went 2-14, but the core of that roster also went 12-4 2 years beforehand. Maybe it's a tad more nuanced than a bunch of losers who can't prepare. Cam came into a locker room of a Hall of Fame wide receiver, 2 offensive linemen, and 2 running backs who either made a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro, 2 linebackers who went on to be who were All-Pros in their careers, plus other high-level contributors like Charles Johnson, Chris Gamble, Terrell Wharton, and more. Wasn't a bum in the locker room. So obviously Jeff did not take well to that, and pretty good points that he put out there. Steve's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. I have to go back and look at the roster. I know he had D'Angelo, Jonathan Stewart, who obviously were great when they were here in Carolina. Thomas Davis, John Beeson would be the linebackers, I assume. And then the 2 other offensive linemen, I don't know who that was. I guess Jordan Gross would be one of them. And then I can't think about who the other one was. And of course, CJ was great. Chris Gamble, which is one of those just forgotten Panthers, it feels like a lot of times. He had a good career, and then Terrell Wharton was also really good. And then, they started off, but they go, 6-10, 7-9, and then they come back a couple years after that, year 3 of Cam. And with Ron here, they go 12-4, and they're the number 2 seed in the NFC. Unfortunately, they lose to San Francisco, Colin Kaepernick on that Sunday afternoon, and a great season ends. But yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say that. And I had a friend who is a Bengals fan who hit me up, and our other buddy in our group chat, and he asked, does Cam Newton ever think about what he's going to say? And I said to him, apparently not, because you have to know that if you come out here and say this, that people are going to respond. And maybe that's what he wants. But I don't look at Cam Newton as trying to be like a shock jock and someone who's going to go out there and try to get reaction. Maybe he is. I don't know. There's a Brock Purdy thing. He never says Brock Purdy's name correctly, but a lot of people, especially in 2023, are very critical of Brock Purdy, whether he was actually good, whether he wasn't good or not, but he's going to get paid, and San Francisco certainly needs him. And Cam was one of those people saying that he's a game manager and not a game changer. And like every quarterback's got to manage the game. Only a few of them, like there's like 5-6 of them that are really game changers, whatever, guys you win because of. I don't really understand it. Like, I know there's the Munich thing that happened, and Cam is confused, like why he wasn't there. He talked about, I guess, at the Panthers facility, there's nothing of Cam Newton up there, but he's also the same guy who's come out and said that he's not going to retire. He's not going to fill out the paperwork for whatever reason, which doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you officially retire, pretty sure he played like 10 years, like you get league pension. Why wouldn't you take that? And then he might get it anyways. I don't know. And then if the Panthers just need you to retire, knowing that you're done, which clearly he's done. It's not Cam Newton retiring. The NFL retired him. The NFL retires most of these players. Very few guys get to leave on their own terms. Like Luke Kuechly retired. The NFL retired Cam Newton. Like there's a difference there when it comes to those certain players. So if he just fills out the paperwork, does that, maybe Carolina starts putting Cam Newton stuff back out there. Clearly no one's worn one, and I don't think anyone's going to be wearing one anytime soon or ever should wear one or should wear 59 or should wear 89 ever as a Carolina Panther. Like those are numbers that should be off limits, in my opinion. And I'm sure plenty of you feel the same way. I don't know. It's a weird relationship that he has with the organization. And I mean, Tepper was a big reason why he came back. So I guess applaud David for being able to sit back and to bring back Cam after the whole situation that played out there during the offseason of 2020 that we all survived. It just is so dumb. All of this. It's just unnecessary to go out there and say something like that, especially when Travis Hunter is clearly just asking you for advice. Travis had the whole situation this past fall with Richard Sherman where he felt like Richard Sherman had said something about him like negatively as far as his wide receiver play. And Sherman wasn't saying at all. He's like, you're a great wide receiver, but you would be like elite at corner. Like that's where you should be playing. And obviously Richard Sherman would know considering what he did in his career, and they got on the same page. Everything was cool. Like Travis Hunter is not that kind of guy that, from everything I've seen from him, because he does the whole YouTube stuff. I think he has a podcast. Also, I think maybe Bleacher Report. I don't know. But he's not the kind of guy that looks like he's going to be out here kind of trashing people and like really taking things like personally all the time. Like he's someone who really wants to be a sponge and understand, hey, what was it like to be in that situation? And Cam, at least in that clip, I didn't see everything that went on in the conversation, didn't give him the best advice. Maybe he did later on. And I want to be fair to him by saying that, because again, didn't see everything, just saw the clip. And when you see the clips, there's context missing. And like Schwartz said, there's nuance missing in the locker room of losers, considering who was in that locker room and what they had done prior. And just the year prior just wasn't great. You have injuries. You have a terrible quarterback in Jimmy Clausen. You got Matt Moore out there. And well, you know, bleep hits the fan. And didn't Brian St. Pierre play in a game that season? The stay-at-home dad who then like tears his like tricep because he threw the ball like 50 times and like 4 picks in that game. It's unfortunate. I think they'll move on past it. But yeah, Cam put his foot in his mouth and kind of made an ass of himself. And it's just like, why? My friend Darren Gant, who of Panthers.com, always says Cam Newton makes people stupid. Nah, I mean, Cam didn't make anybody stupid this time. Cam just said something stupid, and people responded exactly the way you would think they would respond when someone says that you're a loser. All right. The Panthers could be on Hard Knocks because, well, they didn't make the playoffs again, and they're eligible, and 3 other teams are as well. Should the Panthers be featured in Hard Knocks this year? We'll talk about that in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. And this weekend, apparently, is NBA All-Star Weekend. Where's it happening? Have no idea. Will I watch? No, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't watch and that you shouldn't go gamble over on FanDuel on the NBA All-Star Weekend right now. New FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's move on to something a lot less controversial than calling your former teammates all losers. All right. I think it's from Ishan, who's asking me this question. He said the Panthers are one of the 4 teams eligible for Hard Knocks on HBO this year, along with the Atlanta Falcons, the Tennessee Titans, and the Seattle Seahawks. Trying not to be biased here, but it generally feels like we have the most compelling storylines. The media and officials, NFL socials really latched on the Bryce Young resurgence last year, and having guys like Xavier Legette and Robert Hunt does not hurt. Feels pretty similar to the 2022 Lions, who went on to finish 9-8. My question is, what do you think our chances are compared to the other teams? And do you want it? For me, my selfish excitement of getting to watch this behind the scenes every week far outweighs any fears of mythical curse or it being a distraction. And he also said, for me, that would be something else to talk about. Yeah, you know what? I'm down. I've been down in the past as well when talking about this. And we should also remember David, and I was pretty high on this a couple years ago when they were going to have the Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield quarterback competition, Matt Rule entering into a critical year 3. Is he going to make it? I thought that would have made a lot of sense to do it. I guess they instead did the Lions that year, and the Lions did have a tough start, but then finished off great. Lost to Carolina, by the way, the best offensive output by the Carolina Panthers in history of the franchise. And then the Lions did beat the Packers to end Aaron Rodgers' career there, and he just got the boot. The Jets just told him to kick rocks earlier this week. Would have loved it back then, but they didn't do it. And I would love it now as well, not just because it's something to talk about. And I do think that the Panthers do a really good job as far as their video team documenting everything that goes on, like the blueprint. And is there something else that they do? I can't remember, but they do a good job of giving you behind the scenes anyways. Now they're going to give it to you in a different light than HBO would potentially, but everything that HBO puts out there has to be approved by the team. So I'm wondering how different it would be and how they would go about it. It would be awesome to see because Carolina obviously has never been a part of Hard Knocks. Now, personally, I would rather them do the in-season Hard Knocks or do the all or nothing. And David Tepper, when he first came here, he went to Amazon and said, I want to be a part of all or nothing. And that started off as a great season. They were 6-2, and then Cam Newton's body fell apart, and they fell apart in the second half of the season and ended up not making the playoffs. But I enjoyed watching it, and it was really interesting to kind of see how things played out behind the scenes and also to kind of relive that season. And Steve Smith getting after DJ Moore and Dante Jackson didn't necessarily have the best portrayal in all of that, but it was just still cool to be able to watch that. And I would be interested in having Hard Knocks as well. And you look at the rest of the teams that are featured, like the Titans, I don't know what would be interesting about Tennessee. They could take a quarterback there, number 1 overall. They say they're not going to pass on a generational player. Well, that would be Travis Hunter. I know Abdul Carter, someone that a lot of people talk about. He's not generational. We have seen plenty of great edge rushers come out and guys from literally his school, that being Micah Parsons, do the exact same thing that he did at Penn State and now is doing in the NFL. So he's not a generational talent. He's an excellent player, but let's not act like he's a generational talent because we literally have seen that recently. But Travis Hunter, we have not seen anybody in like a generation plus be able to actually come out and play both sides of the field. So that would be interesting if he gets drafted by Tennessee. But other than that, like Brian Callahan, I just don't even know how he still has a job. When you look at how things played out, like, why is that guy still employed? I mean, if they bring back Will Levis, the weirdo who puts mayo in his coffee, I'm good there. I don't need to see any of that. It seems pretty overblown. I have actually really loved his press conferences and like his perspective on like, yeah, I sucked last year and it's a team's best interest to go out there and to see if there's better options. So he gets it and kind of rooting for him. But I mean, I don't need to see Will Levis, and the Tennessee Titans are not interesting. And this is coming from somebody who covered the Titans back when Vrabel first got there, even when Malarkey was there, and they had won a playoff game where Marcus Mariota threw a touchdown to himself. They weren't really interesting back then either. So now coming off of being the number one pick, no one's interested in the Tennessee Titans, and the people in Nashville are barely interested in the Tennessee Titans. So no, I'm good there. And like I'm not going to watch Hard Knocks unless Carolina's on it. I haven't watched it in years. It's done its whole thing. Oh, we're going to talk about this team. We want to win the Super Bowl. It's like Jeff Fisher. We're not going effing 7-9, 8-8 again. Yeah, okay, dude. It's all that kind of stuff. Let's latch onto a guy who's not going to make the team. And I've come and been fairly clear. We pretty much know who's going to be on the team when we head into training camp. There's like 4, 5, 6 top spots that are up for grabs, and the rest of them we already know. So it's like, I don't need to see the Charles James and whether he's going to make the Houston's team. Like, I got it. We've done it for years now. That's why the in-season one, far more interesting. The off-season one that we saw with Mara being like, I really don't want to see Saquon go to the Eagles. If Saquon went to the Eagles and won a Super Bowl, I'm more interested in that than the training camp one, especially when the Panthers already have it. But I would love to see it. And yes, they're more entertaining than the Titans. The Seahawks with Geno. And I mean, Seattle kind of interesting. Like they got a good team. So they just won 10 games. That would be a one that I guess could make some sense. And it's not like we've seen anybody really latch on the Seahawks since they had the Legion of Boom and all that. But all the characters that they had are gone. So I don't know. The Falcons, that would be the one I would think that probably be right there next to Carolina. As far as like you got Michael Penix Jr. coming in, then I'll be this full-time starter. A big year for Raheem Morris, even in year 2, to go out and win. That could make sense. It's either the Falcons or Carolina to me. And I do think with Bryce Young, what he was able to do, being a former number 1 overall pick, being in year 3, huge year. Year 2 of Dave Canales. I mean, the defense has got to turn things around. And yes, Leggett in itself is just a dude that, if he's not already just a star because of his just being himself. I mean, it's hilarious because like you have never seen anyone like this, and no one ever like him has ever been portrayed on HBO as far as I know. So that would be great to see. Yeah, I do think the storylines make sense. Like as far as storylines, it's either Carolina or Atlanta. So yeah, bring it on. But if it's not the Panthers, then yeah, I'll be checking out once again on Hard Knocks because been there, done that. It's all the same. But it would be cool to see Carolina be a part of it, and I'm not worried about them being cursed or it being a distraction at all. It's just cameras, and there are cameras everywhere anyways. And that's why they get paid. All right. I'll take a quick pause and come back, and there's a question about a receiver out of Texas, and also just kind of about the concept of trading back and being able to pick up a couple of the needs Carolina has. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better place to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you can pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. And with the NBA All-Star Game going on this weekend, that is the perfect place to go, and I would assume pick more on points, more on everything, as that is just the world's greatest scrimmage that we see on Sunday night. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. One more question here on this weekly Friday mailbag edition of Locked On Panthers. Again, follow me on Twitter at Julian Council, at me, DM me to get those questions in for next week's edition of the show. Doing it all throughout the offseason on Fridays, and always appreciate every single one of you who sends in a question, even if it does not make the show. Typically try to at least answer it there via DMs or over on Twitter, wherever you send it to me. Final question coming over from, I believe his name's Rich, saying it to me, is there a way the Panthers can trade back and somehow walk away with Mike Green from Marshall, or Walter Nolan from Texas A&M, and Matthew Golden, the wide receiver from Texas? Golden looks like a star wide receiver and a perfect fit with his speed, explosiveness, and separation. But regardless, trade down a few times to walk away with Matthew Golden. So Rich really wants, if that is his name, it really wants Matthew Golden to come in and potentially be the wide receiver 1 for Carolina. And he was at Houston, transferred to Texas, and really stepped up in the final half of the season for the Longhorns, especially once they got to the SEC title game, got to the playoff. He was their guy. Isaiah Bolden from Alabama, who had that 4th and was it 27 against Auburn in the Iron Bowl, which is still just mind-boggling that Nick Saban's final Iron Bowl ended like that down there in Jordan-Hare. He was supposed to be the top guy, you thought, from Texas, was a big portal get, and it ended up being Matthew Golden. who turned out to really be that top dude on the outside. And he is somebody that I'm intrigued by, especially if Carolina decides they want to have, if he's still around at 57 in the second round, I'm down. I do think they should add another receiver. I would prefer to go out there and get a veteran receiver and get the top tier, but we'll see whether that is actually what happens. And I think they're probably not going to actually try to do something like that. And I've seen Tedroy McMillan be mentioned as somebody that would make sense. So a trade back is interesting, though, because that was kind of my official thought throughout the regular season. Whenever people would ask me, hey, what do you think they're going to do in the draft? It's like, well, it's October, and I couldn't give a damn because there's actually games on, and that's not going to happen until the end of April. But sure, I suppose my position right now would be to trade back and get more assets because this team clearly in October sucked. So, yeah, they need more than just a defense. Maybe at the point in time, they need a quarterback. Well, let's focus on the overall roster, which has not really been what they wanted to do under past regimes there in the front office in Carolina. But trading back from 8 and then getting into the middle of the first round and maybe picking up another early second round pick, that could allow you to absolutely get someone like Mike Green or Walter Nolan, who are probably just based off of the draft nerd saying a little bit too high to get them at 8th overall. I don't know. Okay, if that's what they believe, then sure. And if that's what the team believes, then great. But Mike Green, they need an edge rusher desperately, and that would make a lot of sense. I've seen Jalen Walker. I have seen Michael Williams being mocked to Carolina at 8. I have not seen Mike Green or Walter Nolan, either one of those guys being mocked. I have not seen a defensive tackle being mocked to Carolina at 8 at all. So they could trade back in the teens, and maybe just as far as the value of the player, it makes more sense for Carolina than take an edge rusher or defensive tackle. I do think defensive tackle is an area that they should address, certainly in free agency. And then I do think that edge rusher is something they should probably address via the draft. If they can't find a way to get a top tier kind of pass rusher. Talk about like a guy like Josh Sweat, who had 2.5 sacks and was a menace in the Super Bowl. Now everybody was a menace on that Eagles defensive line on Sunday night against Kansas City. So if you could get an edge or a defensive tackle, maybe they're in the middle of the first round, and then early in the second round, you get a wide receiver, and then you still have your second round pick later on there at 57. That could be an ideal scenario because this is a defense that you're trying to completely build. You have JC. You also have Derek Brown. Other than that, Trevor Wallace looks nice. Looks like that can work out. You're going to have to find somebody. I mean, Josie could be there the next 2 years, but certainly this year will be a starter again, I would think. But the safety position, got to completely fill out that safety room. Do they want to stick with Mike Jackson? I think they probably should or will. But there's a lot that they need to do defensively to try and rebuild that side of the ball. And wouldn't it make a lot of sense to just trade back and not just take one player at 8? Unless it's a player you just can't pass up on. But wouldn't it make more sense to trade back, get more assets, get more picks there in the top 100, top 75 at the draft to have guys who can come in immediately, be an impact, and help this team, and then be under that cost-controlled contract for 4 seasons plus? Wouldn't that make sense? So, yeah, I mean, Matthew Golden, love what I saw from him at the end of his tenure there at UT. Mike Green, I'd be lying to you if I said I watched a single Marshall game this past year. I did not. Fun Belt, sorry. I mean, it's not App State. Typically not really watching a ton of Sun Belt games. I guess it was the only one I think I watched. App, maybe a little bit of Coastal. I definitely did see South Al a couple times, especially when my guy Fluff Bothwell, best name in college football, ran all over App's ass up there on the Rock that one Thursday night. But yeah, we'll see what they decide to do. But trading back, it is appetizing. We'll, of course, talk more about that once we get past free agency in a month's time. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where next Friday, be back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be whole. Be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to you on Monday where we take a look at the safety room, which is losing a lot of guys, and try to figure out what Carolina should do this offseason in replenishing its resources there at safety. Coming up here on Monday on Locked On Panthers.